Well, thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to the webinar on NIL and academic eligibility. For purposes of questions, you can submit all of your questions that you have today in the Q&A or the chat, and we will have time at the end to get to this. We're really excited about all of the interest. This is one of the most requested webinars that we hold together with Eccker Sports. Several members of our team, the Honest Game team, as well as the Eccker team, will be on today as well and may reach out to you if you have questions or respond. Just wanted you to know that our team is here and the Eccker team is here to make sure that we answer all of your questions. So again, welcome to the webinar, and we're going to get started. Eligibility for college sports and name, image, likeness are tied closely together. And that is why we're going to start today talking about academic eligibility and its impact, and then hand it over to the Eccker team to talk about NIL. So as I mentioned, eligibility to college sports and NIL are tied closely together. And it's really important that correct measures have to be taken to ensure that your student athlete's NIL activity does not negatively affect their eligibility. Student athletes that are hoping for NIL opportunities first have to be academically eligible to play. And that's a really important point. They need to understand that their NIL opportunities won't happen if they don't meet those initial academic eligibility requirements. And often, if you have athletic performance, the strong athletic performance is usually tied to sort of generating a buzz. And if you can't play because you haven't met the academic eligibility requirements, that could really jeopardize future NIL opportunities. So today, as we get started, our goal is to discuss really the right education, resources to be able to execute on NIL, transparency, and support. All about how to navigate NIL and academic eligibility to really unlock these opportunities for you. So to get started, today, my name is Kim Michelson, co-founder of Honest Game, and I have my colleague here and our partner, Tim Prukop, who's co-founder and CCO of Eccker Sports. And again, as I mentioned, please use the chat or any Q&A to ask any questions that you may have. We're here to support you. So when we talk about academic eligibility, I'll share a little bit about Honest Game, but in the realm of making sure that your student athletes are eligible. Honest Game really is this one comprehensive system, and we work with many, many schools across the country. We also work with student athletes and parents to empower them to unlock academic eligibility opportunities just like they were experts. And remember, as I'm going to say several times, students must be eligible in order to take advantage of NIL opportunities. So when we think of Honest Game is really this educational programming. It's really this one-stop shop for staff and families. We ensure that the NCAA portal audit at schools is maintained. There's a one-click dashboard and individualized student reports, what we call our college athletic reports on eligibility, that really empower everybody in the school village. Just to share a little bit about the facts, 1 in 3 schools in this country are unaccredited or have lapsed with the NCAA Eligibility Center. 1 in 3 schools. And why this matters as far as the housekeeping of the site is because in order to, if you're not academically eligible, and a lot of times that happens because of a class that's missed, that wasn't added to the portal, or maybe weighting wasn't added to the portal. And so without these proper housekeeping and ensuring your NCAA Eligibility Center is up to date, the student athlete is really at risk for not getting scholarships, competition, admissions, rosters, practice, and as we're talking about today, NIL. So for the NCAA Eligibility Center, because I know there's many school administrators on today, it's really important that those courses are up to date. There's tasks as well that are assigned inside the portal that must be maintained. And you have to upload transcripts. So in addition to maintaining all the right courses, there also are tasks that have to be maintained with and kept up with. As far as the portal, as you can see on the left, that's a picture of what that looks like. And some of the questions you may want to ask yourself are those courses approved with the NCAA? Are the AP and honors classes given the proper weighting? Is the grade scale updated? Are credit recovery and summer school courses listed as well? Is your non-traditional or virtual learning curriculum approved? And are there any courses that need additional documentation to be submitted? When we think of the coursework, obviously, we think of there are many opportunities for student athletes to go play at the next level, D1, D2, D3, and we'll also touch upon NAIA and junior college. Some of the basic requirements are that you have to meet for the Division I is that you have to meet a minimum of a 2-3 and your 16 NCAA approved core courses. And 10 of those courses, that's called the 10-7 lock-in, must be taken before the start of your senior year. For D2, you have to have a minimum of a 2.2 NCAA core GPA in those 16 NCAA approved courses. And D3 is no eligibility requirements, but you have to meet the admissions requirements, which is super important. So we like to share all of this information. And again, with Honest Game, we do all of that for you, but it's important for us to educate you and all of you administrators about what to do to be able to best support your student athletes. So what is a core course? Obviously they're in English, math, natural and physical science, social science, foreign language, and comparative religion or philosophy. For the D1 level, 16 approved core courses must be taken: 3 years of English, 2 years of math, algebra or higher, and 2 years of science. And if a lab is required, if it's offered at your school, then it's important that that lab is taken as well. And also, not all high school classes are NCAA core classes. There's only certain classes that are cleared by the NCAA, and they must be listed on your portal. And each high school in the state has its own list of NCAA approved courses. So it's important if one of your student athletes transfers to multiple schools or one or more before they show up at your school, every high school has a different list. So it can be a bit of a maze to put that all together, but Honest Game sort of takes all of those transcripts and kind of collates them into one compliance ready report. The NCAA core GPA is different than your high school GPA, and that's important. Why? Because it only counts those NCAA core courses. So if you see that image on the left, that's your school GPA is at 2.06, but actually you could have a higher NCAA GPA because maybe the classes you didn't do as well in were not NCAA approved. And the converse can happen. You can have a school GPA of a 2.61 and an NCAA core GPA of lower because the courses you didn't do as well in were NCAA core courses. But it's important to remember, among all else, that not all high school classes are NCAA core courses, and each high school has its own list of approved courses. So again, just because you're approved at one school doesn't mean you will be at the second school. NAIA, for that specific division of college sports, students who do not meet the 2.3 minimum overall high school GPA upon graduation can still become eligible if they meet two of the following. Again, a minimum high school GPA of a 2.0 on a 4.0 scale, a minimum test score of 18 on the ACT or 970 on the SAT, and graduating in the top 50% of your high school class. NAIA is a great opportunity and a great division of sports. And at Honest Game, we really believe that it shouldn't be a D1 and bust mentality. There are many, many options for college sports: D1, D2, D3, NAIA, and even junior college. Just to sort of illustrate that point a bit more, you can see all of the options from the number of schools in NAIA, the number of schools in Division I, Division II, the number of student athletes, the sports offered, and all of the scholarships available. Even at Division III, they're not offering athletic scholarships, but they have a huge endowment typically, and there are lots of merit money that can be given. There are more than $3 billion every year given out in athletic scholarships. $3 billion. So making sure you meet that academic eligibility, all those academic eligibility requirements are critical to be able to access those funds and NIL opportunities. If you see here, we have a checklist. We call it the checklist for the college-bound student athlete. We can send this out later, or you can go ahead and take a photo and download. I'll stay on the slide for just an extra second so that you can download this right now on your on your cell phone. It goes from freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, and is really this checklist of everything that you need to do to make sure you are on track as a college-bound student athlete. dummies down or simplifies academic eligibility for anybody, no matter what your experience. We use a red light, green light, yellow light system as if you were driving. We show all the divisions of college sports. Red means you're not a qualifier at the moment in that division. Green means you are, and yellow means you're a partial qualifier or an academic redshirt. Everything about Honest Game is proactive. Just because you're not on track doesn't mean you can't be. And we show you exactly what you need to do to be on track academically. And you can make those changes all the way through your high school career. We also believe in analytics. It's very important to show the changes. So how many students are on track at D1 at a school? How many are on track for D2? How many are there certain schools that have more credit issues? And over time, what you notice is the more students, parents, counselors, administrators are educated, those numbers get better and better with education, and you find many less kids have credit issues because everyone knows what to do before it's too late. As we mentioned earlier, in the Honest Game software, you can toggle from Division 1 to Division 2 to Division 3 to all of the pathways. And in each pathway, it'll show you what you need to do. So in this example, it'll show you that this student is short in the D1 tab for meeting the grade requirements. She needs a 2.3 and she has a 2.27. She's also missing 1 credit. And on the right, it'll show you what credit? English. So again, there is not the idea of just go study. We're going to tell you what you do and provide a personalized individual pathway for every single student. This is what the software looks like. We integrate with student information systems. So on the freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior year, you will see the academic eligibility laid out. What it does is Honest Game transforms a high school transcript, which looks all different across the country, to a college compliance ready report. The white classes are NCAA approved, the gray are not, and it will show you what you have to do before it's too late. If you see there are little locks on some of those grades, that's because the NCAA has a rule called the 10-7 lock-in rule, which means you have to take 10 of your NCAA core courses before the start of your senior year or 7th semester, and they must be in those core subject areas, English, math, and science. So what Honest Game really is it really your academic eligibility specialist to support your counseling staff, to support your curriculum, to support your athletic directors, and even more, provide college coaches what they need. They need to know a student is academically eligible and admissible before that they can offer them onto their campus. So it accelerates the whole process, diversifies post-secondary opportunities, and really provides everybody in the school village, from the parent to the student to the counselor to the athletic director to the coach, all the same information so everybody knows what to do before it's too late. So now I really appreciate you taking the time here to join us and learn about NIL and academic eligibility and how sort of the intersection takes place and why it is so important to the NIL process and also to the athletic scholarship process. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague here, Tim Prukop, to talk a little bit more about what's happening in the NIL space.
Thanks, Kim. Appreciate all that information. And and as we know, matriculating from high school to college is a complicated scenario, and it's great to have people like Honest Game that are out there helping administrators and counselors and parents and families to do that. 2 years ago, Randy Eccker and I decided to do the same as it relates to name, image, and likeness. We knew that this was going to be a very complicated topic. It was going to have tremendous impact on both high school and college student athletes. And so our goal has been to try to put together an educational platform to help people understand what's going on with the NHL, with name, image, and likeness, have access to resources and good information so you make good decisions about how that might impact you or your student athletes. So what I would like to do over the next few minutes is just talk about what's going on with name, image, and likeness today across the United States, and then talk about some core concepts that are important to understand to give you a baseline as you think about how to deal with it with your student athletes. And then we'll open this up for questions. And if you have any that along the way, just put them in the chat. So today there are 31 state high school academic or activities associations that allow student athletes to participate in their governed activities and be able to monetize their name, image, and likeness. And what's important to know about that is In the past, we've had this concept of amateurism, where in order to play high school sports, you have to be an amateur. You couldn't be receiving money based on your name, image, and likeness. Well, that is now changed. And various states have different interpretations of what that means. But generally speaking, in those 31 jurisdictions, a student athlete could use their name, image, and likeness to do an endorsement, to do a social media deal, to do advertising for different products and brands, and still have the ability to compete at the high school level. You'll see that there are still some states that are staunchly against it. The red states that are on this list, like Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina, although the Georgia High School Athletic Association is actually taking it up in their next board meeting that we know of. We've worked directly with about 10 of the different state athletic and activities associations to help them craft their NIL strategy over the last 2 years. And we're happy to help along the way answer questions. Next slide, please. Or do I get, can I move it? Okay, good. So
I got it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kim. So every state has, you can go to the next slide, please. Every state has its own name, image, and likeness laws. What happened in 2020 when NIL first came onto the scene, the Supreme Court made a ruling that limited the NCAA's ability to limit what type of money that student athletes could earn when they were in school. And as a result, all of the states across the country created name, image, and likeness laws for their state. And those name, image, and likeness laws are specific to each state. In the last cycle of legislative reform, we saw every state go in and change their NIL law again to make it more beneficial for the colleges that are in their states. So, for example, in the state of Missouri, they allow high school athletes to participate in name, image, and likeness and be eligible for sports if they've signed a letter of intent to attend a university in the state of Missouri. So so a lot of these laws are being designed to help the universities in their states. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. 80% of the deals that happen when kids make money from name, image, and likeness come through social media related activities. So posting information about brands and things like that. The reason that most of the high school athletic associations have moved to allow high school athletes to participate is because they want to avoid potential lawsuits. And there's been a couple that have occurred. We can talk about Tennessee and some other states where lawsuits came out. And then they also wanted to get ahead of it and create a scenario where NIL could operate within their school system as opposed to waiting for a state legislator to tell them what to do. And now we have a growing interest in a federal legislation that would actually come and control name, image, and likeness across the board and make it uniform for everybody. But it's not that way today. And we've got a long way to go to get there. Next slide, please. So the important concepts to know, let's talk about antitrust so that we understand where this came from. So name, image, and likeness started this back in 2014, 15. Ed O'Bannon was a basketball player at UCLA. Their team won the NCAA championship. And that summer, he was at the home of a friend who was playing NCAA basketball on the TV. And his friend selected UCLA as the team. And Ed saw his own name, image, and likeness in a player on the court. And he asked UCLA, well, how do you have the right to give this away to this company selling the video game? And he found out that the NCAA actually was paid millions of dollars by EA Sports to be able to use and license the rights for all the teams. And Ed O'Bannon asked the question, well, if you guys are making millions of dollars on that, why don't I get a piece of that? And that's where this all started. And at that point in time, the NCAA decided to start providing more money for student athletes that were on scholarship across what was called the total cost of living. And so if you were in Los Angeles, you could earn, and you were attending UCLA, you could earn another $3,000 a month for living expenses. If you were in Austin, Texas at the University of Texas, you could earn $2,800 a month in additional revenue. So that was the first move in this direction. The second thing that happened was Alston and several other student athletes said that it wasn't fair for the NCAA to determine what their extra educational benefits could be. And so that was the lawsuit that made it to the Supreme Court. And what the Supreme Court ruled was that student athletes basically form a class of employees, because by what they do and participating in those sports, they help those universities make millions and millions of dollars in TV rights fees and ticket sales and merchandise sales. And so Judge Kavanaugh, in his opinion, said that the NCAA didn't have the right to unfairly restrict what a student athlete could earn based on how much money the student athletes were bringing to those universities. And so that's what opened the door for this whole thing. At the high school level, the antitrust issue does not apply, because nobody's been able to make the case that high school athletes form a class of a labor force that is earning money for schools. So that's not the issue that applies. What applies at the high school level is the ability to do things that don't conflict with the goals of school districts or the associations. Next slide, please. Intellectual property is what we're talking about when it relates to how a student athlete actually can monetize something that they create, whether that's their name, their image, and their likeness. And there's ways that they can copyright and trademark those, so that when people are trying to utilize their name, image, and likeness, they can be compensated for that. Next slide, please. There's a concept of collectives that you may have heard about. So when the NCAA saw the ruling that was coming down from the Supreme Court, they abdicated responsibility back to the states, and they basically said three things. One, that a student athlete can't be paid to play for their performance on the field. A student athlete can't be induced to come to a school using NIL money. And third-party entities cannot participate in the recruiting of student athletes at universities. As long as you follow those three things, the NCAA said, then you can follow whatever your school's policies and procedures are as it relates to NIL, or you can follow the state law in your state. And that's where this idea of collectives developed, because originally the universities couldn't actually do the work for NIL for the student athletes. It had to be a separate entity. And so a collective are created by boosters and alumni who actually raise money into the collectives and then distribute the money to the student athletes for based on certain activities as those athletes do. And initially, the collective was completely independent from the university. Now that's changed in the recent state laws that have been developed. Some of the universities are actually allowed to do the work of the collective on behalf of the student athlete. Next two slides, please. And so the important thing about this slide is, if you have a student athlete that's being recruited by a university, there's a couple things that you really want to have them watch out for. One is not to be talking to anybody about coming to the university that's not part of the athletic department or the coaching staff or the sport with which they play. If the NCAA can define that if a student athlete has had interactions with a third party or a booster, then they can presume that a violation has occurred of their NIL policy, and they can create an investigation, and they can get that stuff going, which can be damaging to the school and the student athlete. So make sure your student athletes aren't having conversations, email conversations, or text message conversations with boosters or third parties. They should only be communicating with coaches. And then make sure your student athletes also understand that if the NCAA determines that they were offered money to come to a university, and the NCAA can identify a communication that says that, they could potentially become ineligible. Next slide, please. So what we do at Eccker is we provide an education platform to help coaches, administrators, players, and their families understand all of the information that we've talked about. We have access to all the policies and procedures of every state, every high school athletic association, and every university across the country. We help the administrators put policies and procedures in place to manage the NIL compliance that's required by whatever the regulations are that they operate under. And then we try to help our student athletes understand how to maximize their NIL opportunities without jeopardizing their eligibility. So that, I think, is it. And I guess we'll stop here. And during the course of the remainder of this conversation, we'll leave this line up. If you'd like to register for the Eccker Sports NIL Playbook, it's $50 a year is the membership fee. If you use that QR code, you can get it for half off, today and through the end of this month. And then Kim, I'll let you talk about what your promotion is there.
Thank you. Great job, Tim. And one thing I want to mention for everybody on here is that the Eccker Sports team, one reason that Honest Game is such a big fan of the Eccker Sports team is that they, many people talk about NIL, but don't have a lot of high school experience on the NIL side. They have the college experience, and that's something that Eccker does. So I think that's really valuable because it's obviously it's a really different situation when you're talking with high school students versus when you're talking with college students. So from the Honest Game package side, we will have exclusive discounts. It really depends. From the high school side, we'll have discounts that we can share with you on the high school packages, as well as individuals, if there's individuals on here as well, and obviously some colleges as well. So you can just log in and we'll reach out to you and talk about what your needs are.
Look, it looks like Tyler has a question about the collectives, and let me clarify that. So in the initial conception of name, image, and likeness at the university level, the athletic departments themselves could not participate in helping organize NIL deals for their student athletes. Across the board, all the states prevented that. So they set up these collectives as independent third parties that manage that independently, quote unquote, from the independently from. I would leave that slide up, Kim, then if somebody wants to use those QR codes. So the collectives operated independently from the athletic department, and the athletic department, like in the state of Texas and the state of Florida, for example, it was against state law for a university employee to actually engage in conversations about and name, image, and likeness with a student athlete. And so that's why they were created as separate entities. And in that way, the collective operated independently, although they had conversations with the coaches, obviously. Since then, it's beginning to change. And a lot of the collectives, there were some for-profit collectives that were set up, and then there were nonprofit collectives that were set up so that when people donated money into the collective, if it was a nonprofit, they could get a tax deduction for that. The IRS has recently opined that they will not allow those deductions in those collectives because the money is going directly to student athletes for what they're doing. It's not going to help or benefit a nonprofit. So that's how it was originally set up. Today, these things are merging together. So the states have changed the laws to allow the universities to actually help facilitate deals for the student athletes. And so now the collectives are becoming closer and more ingrained with what the athletic departments are actually doing.
There was a question I saw. I'm having trouble showing my question when I share my screen, but there was a question that I just saw just a few minutes ago about when I was showing earlier academic eligibility across all divisions and then how we do analytics. Yes, that is an example of a particular school using us. It wouldn't be in that particular school is using us for either all of their student athletes or all of their students. So the numbers are accurate because it really reflects sort of what's happening in that school over time.
Denise was asking about when will Texas vote on name, image, and likeness. So at the college level, student athletes can participate in name, image, and likeness and play college sports. At the high school level, the UIL has a restriction that does not allow high school student athletes to monetize their name, image, and likeness and play in UIL activities. There was a bill written by Senator Caglione from South Lake Carroll this year that went into it was in there. It passed the House, it got into the Senate, and in the Senate it stalled in committee, so it didn't come out of committee. And so that bill would have allowed high school student athletes that were 18 years or older to participate in UIL sports and name, image, and likeness. It did not get out of the Senate committee, so it did not pass. Now, there is a special session happening in Texas in September on a couple of things around education, around vouchers. We do not anticipate that to come back up. So the next time that there could potentially be an NIL law that gets passed in the state legislature in Texas would be 2 years from now in that legislative session.
We'll share this again in a few minutes, but I'm gonna turn the sharing off for a few moments.
So there's a question about, will NIL opportunities affect students' ability for their college scholarships? And the answer to that is no. An NIL opportunity is just like any other job. It'd be just like getting a job at the pizza place or getting a job mowing lawns or whatever. It won't affect your scholarship opportunities. It can affect your financial aid opportunities. So if you're trying to file for a Pell Grant, for example, and you earn over $400 through some sort of NIL activity, that $400 will count against your expected family contribution. So you just have to think about it like NIL money is just like a job that you would have and have to report against.
There's a question here that says, how does a student's academic eligibility play into their NIL? So just to answer that, if a student is not academically eligible to play, then their NIL opportunities will be far and few between. So if you think about it from a business perspective, they're interested in NIL to sort of create awareness and buzz for their brand or their product, and they want to sell more. And if obviously competition is how you sort of build buzz on that. So without that playing time, businesses will not really see that return on investment. So again, NIL is exciting, and it's a huge thing. Just remember that kids have to qualify academically in order to, be able to have access to those opportunities.
James had asked, does the NIL deal have to relate directly to the college that the student athlete attends? And the answer to that's no. A student athlete could do an endorsement for a product or a service, completely, has nothing to do with the university that they're involved with. So the two do not have to be related. Now, what's interesting now, you do see opportunities where, like last year, Bryce Young did was in the commercial for Dr. Pepper for their college, fan commercials. We had two student athletes from Notre Dame actually did a TV commercial for the NBC season for sports. So now you're seeing student athletes actually being paid to be in advertisements for universities, but there's no requirement that an NIL opportunity has to have anything to do with the university.
There's another question in here from Bernard Chevis about a high school license. So we'll provide, whether you're talking particularly about Eccker or Honest Game, we'll provide that information for you. And I can share again the QR codes so you can reach out to us and learn more.
Bernard, are you in Texas? If you are, that's a different answer. There's a question. Yeah, I figured. Yeah. So right now on our site, the coach at the high school needs to sign up, and then they can make the NIL stuff available to the student athletes. But if you just send me an email at tim@eckersports.com, I can make sure you get a license if you'd like one at that discount, Bernard. So what happens if students sign a letter of intent with the university where NIL is permitted? I'm not sure I understand the question, other than the two things are independent of each other, and they cannot be linked. So a student athlete can't sign a national letter of intent to go to a university because he's going to get paid a certain amount of NIL money. That would be against the NCAA regulations. But if a student athlete is doing NIL deals, they have an opportunity to play college sports, they can sign a national letter of intent as well.
And also, just to add to that, from an eligibility perspective, until the student and athlete enrolls in the university, until that point, they're still subject to the laws of their state. So if your state does not allow NIL at the high school level, then that can impact your eligibility by entering those activities early.
Yeah, and I think the way to think about that is if the state doesn't allow it, like here in Texas, and you do something, it would make you ineligible to compete at the high school level. Now how that affects your ability to go to a college or play, that's obviously distracting. James asked, do the athletes need to have an NIL agent to get deals? They do not need to have one, but they can have one. And so in the states that allow name, image, and likeness at the high school level, they allow the student athletes to have a attorney or a marketing agent help them with deals. What every state prevents is a sports agent helping you to try to get either a scholarship or to try to get you to sign for a professional team. So there's a clear distinction between an attorney or a marketing agent helping to find endorsement deals versus a sports agent who's trying to represent you to get a scholarship or represent you to get a professional contract. Those two things, the professional contract or scholarship, are illegal in most states.
I see a note from John, a message: will Honest Game automatically update student courses at the end of each semester, or does someone need to manually enter them with the new classes at the end of each semester? So Honest Game does, from a high school perspective, integrate with many student information systems. So we don't really believe in manual reporting. There are some schools that can do also uploads of individual transcripts as well. So it does, to answer your question, John, it will automatically update those courses.
Jessica's asking, do high schools have to carry a license in order for NIL to be allowed? And the answer is no, they do not. Each state high school athletic association has certain restrictions. Like, for example, they would say things like, you can't endorse alcohol products, you can't endorse tobacco products, you can't endorse adult entertainment products and things like that. And student athletes can't use their high school logos and do social media posts on campus during team events, right? Those restrictions would live within the bylaws of the high school athletic association, but there's no license that's required by the school. The school just has to follow the regulations from the high school athletic association. And then Matt asked, do most states have an age requirement, 16 or 18 in order for NIL? Does it correlate to labor laws in those states? And the answer is no. The only state so far that I've seen that has any type of even consideration of age was the bill that was put in place here in Texas, which didn't pass. So the way that NIL is managed in each state is by the state law and how it is affected by labor laws and child labor laws and those kinds of things. They all apply, because all an NIL deal is a work contract for somebody to do something on behalf of somebody in consideration for some amount of money or for some gifts. And then Jessica asks, is there a list of do's and don'ts for NIL? Most states, actually the state high school athletic associations, have created their do's and don'ts lists. We have too. So at eckersports.com, you can go to the resource hub and there's all kinds of material that's available to our members about things to do, things not to do, things to be aware of when you're being recruited, things to be aware of on your recruiting trip, things to be aware of as it relates to your tax responsibility, and all those kinds of things. So all of that is part of the resource hub that we provide.
Honest Game has a resource hub as well, and lots of educational information that's important for us, whether you use Honest Game or not, to make sure that you are staying informed and can help your student or your student athletes at your school stay on track.
Great. I'm just posting.
And somebody, you put in your email? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. All right, great. Well, it's been really fun. Kim, thanks for letting us join you guys on this. It's always so fun to do these with you. Eccker Sports and Honest Game both have the same interest in mind, and that's helping students be able to get to the next level and do great things. And it's always an honor to do stuff like this with you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I hope everybody on this call in this webinar has learned a little something that they can take back with them to their school or their student. And again, Tim and I are here should anybody have follow-up questions or information. Thank you again for all of your interest in this. And again, Tim, thanks for being a partner.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.